name's Matt Spade. I'm the chair of the Department of Psychiatry here at UCSF. So I had the great fortune to know Allison, but sadly for only about 2 years. Allison served on the search committee that found me, ultimately brought me to UCSF, and she played a central role in my decision to come. After I first met her when she was interviewing me, we spent a great deal of time talking on the phone about the neuroscience community at UCSF. And I'm sure it'll come as no surprise to those of you who know her that I was immediately, completely entranced by her sense of what was possible in the neuroscience community here, the picture that she painted about what we could do together. So much so that before I officially arrived, I asked her to be vice chair for basic research in the Department of Psychiatry. When I met with Allison in her office to see if she would consider it, I was caught completely off guard being new to UCSF when she told me that she had had cancer and that she had just learned that it had recurred. And so I immediately told her to forget it, and that being a vice chair is both a thankless and time-consuming role, but Allison would have none of it. She dove into the job. She started a basic science advisory committee, launched a search for 3 new junior faculty, served on the department executive committee, and provided me just tremendously valuable advice and counsel right up to the last weeks of her life. So I'm mindful that I know her or knew her far less well than pretty much everyone in the room, but I can say that it didn't take long for me to realize that she was truly one of a kind. As you all know, her science was absolutely spectacular. She's a giant in the field. I came to know her as a tireless and devoted advocate for our junior faculty and for women in science generally. She was a gifted leader, truly gifted leader. She had the ability and the desire to think strategically about the role that we could play, that the department could play in linking basic and clinical neuroscience at UCSF to gain traction on and finally solve the tremendously complex problems that our patients and their families face every day. Allison, I think, was particularly gifted at forming alliances and breaking down silos, reaching out to people across traditional boundaries, and she always did so in the service of the most positive and constructive and collaborative agendas. It feels like a serious understatement to say that she will be irreplaceable. So my remarks are going to remain brief, and I'm going to turn the mic over to Steve Lisberger, who will lead us through this morning. I just want to say before I do that I want to welcome all of you. I particularly want to welcome Allison's family, both the Doupes and the Brainards, all of her friends who have come from far and wide to celebrate her life today. And her work. And I want to thank in advance the folks who made this possible. So Sam Barendis, Michael Stryker, Michael Brainard, and Vika Sohal were teamed up immediately to conceive of and plan this event, but it would not have been possible without the help of our staff, Ann Poirier in particular, but also Shelley Green, Nicholas Rosnowski, and Nanette Nemenzo. So thank you all for coming. I think it will be a sad, but in some ways joyous day to hear about Allison's life and her science and to celebrate it together. Thank you.
Forgive me for having some notes on this occasion. Before I start the comments I've planned, I just want to say that I'm not known for composure, and so please forgive me if I find this slightly challenging. So I'm honored to be chosen for this role today. I have to say that I have had many visions of what it would be like to come back to UCSF and speak to my former colleagues. And this isn't quite how I drew it up, but it still is a great honor to be asked to MC the first half and to be given the opportunity to make some comments. I could easily have planned a 2-hour lecture to say everything that really needs to be said about Allison. And I decided to avoid that, and I hope other people will fill in where I've missed. So I do want to also thank the organizers for getting us together. And I see this first as an opportunity to celebrate Allison's life and her contributions to science and to UCSF, but also as a reunion. And I think this reunion emphasizes really what has been, is, and will continue to be UCSF's special brand. Allison was really a central member of the community as I knew it, and from what Matt has said, it sounds like she really blossomed in recent years into being a central member of the entire UCSF community. And I would say that the list of attendees today, the people who are in the audience, really testifies to how many people Allison touched. So there are a few things in here that are meant to be funny, so feel free to laugh. Allison and I met on a park bench in New Orleans in November of 1991, and we were recruiting for the first 2 faculty jobs in the newly minted Keck Center for Integrative Neurosciences. And Allison was one of the people who had applied, and we sat down on that park bench, and much as Matt has said to you, in 10 minutes, I was captivated by her brilliance, her enthusiasm, her bright, fresh outlook, the sparkle in her eye, and her enthusiasm and her belief. And I knew immediately after 10 minutes, without having heard her give a talk or read her papers or even really looked hard at her CV again, that this was someone we needed at UCSF. And I could see that she would be a leader, and she was. So I'd like for my comments today to really emphasize Allison's contributions in several domains. So first of all, Allison's scientific contributions. If you go through the list of the things that she did that were really new, I would say that there were several things that were really seminal. One was the discovery of neurons that are responsive to BOSS. Now, for those of you who don't know the jargon, BOSS means to a bird's own song. And this turned out to be an absolutely key element in what then unfolded as a revelation in understanding how birds learn their songs, how the song system works, many different aspects of it. I'd say the second, from my perspective, the second major impact that Allison's science had was her discovery, along with Neil Hessler, that social context modulated the variability of song, that birds were extremely variable when they were singing in the shower, presumably practicing, but much more reliable when they were singing in an important venue like to a mate or a potential mate. And this, on the one hand, it was a fairly descriptive observation, but on the other hand, it set so many things in motion within her field. It turned out to be the very first discovery that set the entire UCSF systems neuroscience community at work on the critical question of what is variability in behavior, what is variability in neural responses, and what does it mean for the organism. It was really an extraordinarily seminal finding, and I think if you go back and look at history, that really is where it started. Then Allison, her work really focused on discovering neural mechanisms, on getting beyond description to a mechanism. And her discoveries, I'm not going to recount them. Some of her former students and postdocs will talk about some of it today, I'm sure. But I think that if you look back through what she did, it is truly remarkable how much she discovered and how focused she was on this question of what is vocalization, how is it learned, how is it emitted, and how can we use that knowledge to better human life? And I think her review with Pat Kuhl in the annual review of neurosciences, which compared human speech and birdsong, really is a seminal piece. And I actually, if there are students in the audience who haven't read it, I would commend it to them. Allison's contributions, I should say, I did a PubMed search on Allison yesterday on the airplane on the way out here. And I was impressed to discover that she published what looked to me like counting 43 original papers and 9 reviews. When you think of the magnitude of her contribution compared to the number of papers, it really emphasizes something about Allison, something she taught the people around her, something she taught her students and postdocs. And that is, you need to be measured not on the grocery scale, but rather on the Richter scale. And if you measure Allison's contributions on the Richter scale and compare it to the measurement on the grocery scale, you realize that she was a very careful, selective, thorough publisher. She never published before she was ready to. You guys are supposed to laugh on that one, anyone who's tried to write a paper with Allison. And when it came out, it was the final statement on the topic. I also noted that Allison, and I had this experience personally in working closely with her on many scientific and administrative issues, Allison believed in sending your paper to the right journal the first time. Not in sending it to Nature, and then to Nature Neuroscience, and then to Neuron, and then to the Journal of Neuroscience, and then to Current Biology, and so forth and so on. And this, I think that this is a philosophical point of view that I hope, and I think her students and postdocs and the faculty around her got. And that is, do it right the first time, make it complete, make it impactful in the sense of how it moves the field forward, not in the sense of how many citations it gets, or worse, how many citations the other papers published in the same journal get. So that was Allison's scientific work, but it had a much broader impact. I think it's really inadequate to say that Allison was a major leader in the birdsong community. In fact, she had a huge role in making it happen. She was really there on the ground level, and her vision, her imagination, her publications, and her way of talking about it, her excitedness, the sparkle in her eye, brought people into the field and really made it a central discipline in neuroscience. Now, Matt mentioned that Allison was a tireless advocate for women in science. And I note in my own notes here of what I wanted to say that in bringing birdsong to the center of the field of neuroscience, Allison stood up against some pretty big dogs, and I do mean male dogs, and she prevailed. She really was very successful. But we all knew Allison, and she was successful in a very unpresupposing way. She's very charming, and she had this huge, important mission. She knew clearly what it was, and she knew how to get it done. So the second thing I want to talk about is, my title is Order and Disorder. Anyone who walked into Allison's office had the impression of disorder. I don't know if Shelley's in the audience, but I know that with Shelley and other assistants, there was always the mission of let's clean it up. Let's stack the papers up, let's get things filed, let's get files, let's get everything. Never happened. But behind that superficial disorder was order. And she had a knack for what I call conceptual, intellectual, internal order. I have two examples. The first is that I relied on her for advice in writing papers. And in that relationship, my role was to get the words down on a piece of paper, and her role was to put them in the right order for me. And she was amazing at that. And when we succeeded in getting a paper in Nature in 2001 that I thought was a really important paper, it's only because Allison worked hard on it with me and put the words in the right order. The other story about order with Allison has to do with the planning and design and planning of what we call Building 19A, which is now your beloved Sandler Neuroscience Building. Allison and I worked pretty hard on that together. She was a tireless supporter and just a fountain of enthusiasm, energies, and ideas. And when things were going badly, she was always the one who said, no, let's stay in there. Many of you have probably forgotten that Building 19A was first planned as about 1/3 of the current building, what Don Fisher called in one of the planning meetings a grain of sand on the Mission Bay campus. And in the planning for that, Allison and I worked very closely with the architects, and we had a brutally challenging time getting the architects to understand that this is not a standard molecular biology, biochemistry group, and that we needed lots of little rooms and we needed some open spaces. And finally, after a long time, they sent us a plan that had all the right spaces in it. And I looked at it and I said, Allison, it's not right. And she said, yeah, it's got all the right rooms, but they're in the wrong order. She said, let's get a meeting together with the architects, and we sat down, we stood up with the architects with things taped on the wall and whiteboards, and she basically said to them, okay guys, you've got everything we need here, but you got to reorder it. It's got to be in an order that promotes collaboration. As really a stroke of genius. So we were colleagues for 20 years, and Allison was a major force in systems neuroscience, the Keck Center, and neuroscience on campus. She was the central figure in unifying our group for successful program project applications and for our Conte Center. I remember a key moment at the site visit with NINDS, where they came to us, which I know they don't do much anymore, over our first program project application. And we had very carefully planned the whole thing, and Allison and I had put our heads together and said, the only thing we have to do is control Merznick. I haven't seen Mike yet. I don't know if he's here. So about 9/10 of the way through the 4-hour site visit, one of the site visitors, who shall go unnamed, said to us, but what makes you guys think that the bird brain has anything to do with the mammalian cerebral cortex? Mike piped up and he said, are you an expert on the mammalian cerebral cortex? And the birdsong expert kind of surprisingly said no. Merznick said, well, I am. And there's a relationship. And Allison and I looked at each other, and believe me, we wanted the escape hatch. We were sure that it was doomed. But Allison, there was then a letter written to NINDS that they called the letter, describing how the whole thing held together. And Allison wrote that mostly. I helped a little bit, and it was extraordinarily successful. So Allison really had a way with people. No meeting with Allison lasted less than an hour, and we always contrasted that because no meeting with me lasted more than 10 minutes. So you can imagine what happened when Allison and I got in the same room. Allison's meetings lasted an hour because she was totally focused on every detail that could be related to the issue at hand. Totally focused on the person, on the scientific issues, on getting everything right, and just going over it in every detail. Of course, she was a psychiatrist, so I guess we expected that. Allison also had a real sense of organizational dynamics. We used to joke that she was keeping her clinical credentials fresh by serving as a psychiatrist to everyone in the Keck Center, faculty and students alike, and lots of other people in the neuroscience community. I know she was a huge advisor personally to me. And in fact, at one point when my sister in New York was worried about me because of something I had said that had misled her, she called Tony and said, who do I talk to? And Tony said, Allison. And so she called Allison, and Allison reassured her that everything was fine, and then came and talked to me to find out what was going on. So some of you remember me as a difficult person around here, and I just want to let you know that there was a method to the madness. And in the planning of 19A, for example, sometimes when we went into a meeting that was going to be difficult, Allison would say to me, okay, Steve, you may not lose your cool and stomp out of this meeting. And so I would bite my tongue and everything would be fine. And when I was getting upset, Allison would take over and make everything happen. There were, however, times when she said to me, if things aren't going our way, you are to lose your cool and stomp out of this meeting. We really had good cop, bad cop down to a science. So I want to end my comments on the science. Allison would want us to focus today on advancing neuroscience. I think we'll see in the talks that we have planned for today that the people who were closest to her professionally indeed are doing that. So thank you for the opportunity to make a few comments. And I'd now like to introduce our first speaker, Ulrike Heberlein. And I do not see any need for me to say anything elaborate about these speakers. I think they are all well known to all of us. So Ulrike.